Hello, everybody. Thanks for that kind introduction. So, as Phil explained, I'm here to talk about choosing and implementing CMP, and the title of the talk is For Your Website. The little asterisk in the subtext here is to remind us that actually a CMP isn't technically just for a website. It's for kind of all of your digital presence that's delivered via the World Wide Web, and it can often be the odd little bits that don't quite fit into a conventional website that cause problems, like perhaps you have standalone landing pages, or you have a marketing automation system that handles some parts of your interactions and forms, or you have a live chat system or something like that. So a CMP for your public-facing digital presence, where the center of that is likely to be your website. And as Phil said in the introduction, my specialism these days is with my agency Sharp Ahead. We're focused on kind of niche business-to-business clients. So I've tried not to be particularly biased towards business-to-business applications in the presentation material here, but that's my day job. So inevitably there'll be a slight kind of focus, particularly when I'm talking about the lessons learned. They're going to be more for B2B lead generation type applications. So let's move on to the and then Phil's already given a little bit of background about me. I'm very much a data person and a technology person. Originally, I started life as a software engineer rather than a marketer, and I think again some of that may come out in the perspective that I take to implementing and choosing CMPs. I personally would not consider myself a CMP expert. I'm a kind of generalist digital technology person that works with CMPs and analytics and other things that fit into the B2B digital marketing stack. And again, my agency are not in any way CMP experts, but we have, just in the natural run of our business for our clients, we've been involved now in quite a lot of CMP implementations, just over 50 at the last count. So we have some kind of real life experience. And I guess the nice thing about being an agency is you get to work with lots of different CMPs and across lots of different client applications. So hopefully there are some lessons learned from that will be useful to you. So here's my running order for today. So first thing, to address the question, do you need a CMP or not? Kind of massive spoiler, yeah, you do need a CMP. It's not all that complicated. I'll come on to that in a second. Second thing I want to talk about is in general terms what a CMP does for you. What is the functionality associated with a consent management platform? And that's mostly to give us a framework that we can use for the main part of the talk, which is the considerations that you might apply when choosing an appropriate CMP for your business. I'm going to break those down into those different sections there, which will relate back to the different bits of functionality that a CMP has. And then some specific lessons that we've learned from our 50 or so CMP implementations that won't actually take very long to go through, but I think that might be one of the most useful parts of the talk. So hang on for that towards the end. And I've got just one little diversion at the end of the talk about I think there are one or two scenarios where you might consider handling consent in a different way, and one of those is B2B landing pages. So I'd like to just give you a little example of that, and I'm going to try and cover my material fast enough to leave some time for Q&A at the end. And then because my sort of software engineering background crept in, and I felt like I wanted to talk a little bit about consent mode more generally than just how consent mode relates to CMPs. So I'm going to just indulge myself for a couple of minutes in the middle of that section and talk a little bit about consent mode and the design patterns that are associated with that. But bear with me, it'll make more sense when I get to it. Some things I'm not going to talk to today. So obviously nothing in this presentation should be construed as legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. If you want to make sure you're complying with the law, you need to talk to a lawyer or a specialist. I hope the information that we cover today is useful, but it's definitely not legal advice, and you can't sue me if you follow my advice and something bad happens. I'm not going to get into the details of GDPR and other pertinent legislation. As if you listen to orally just now, you'll realize just how complicated that is. I think others are better placed to speak on that. But you will need to understand some of those details if you want to use a CMP to become compliant. I'm not going to do a really detailed, here's exactly how you implement one particular CMP, because I would like today to be useful to you, irrespective of which CMP you end up working with. And I'm not going to get into things like how consent mode it impacts the data that you can collect, although that's important too from an analytics point of view. So, but time is limited today. I'm going to stay away from all of those things. So, first question: Do you need a CMP? Well, pretty much the answer is yes. You do need a CMP. Why do I say that? First of all, I think this will be more clear from a technical perspective when I get into the detail of what a CMP does, and I show you kind of how complicated, how many different things it handles for you. But basically, if we were having this conversation 3, 4, 5 years ago, we might have said, well, the law's still a bit nebulous, and there isn't really any enforcement action happening, and we don't. Perhaps it isn't that high a business priority to be compliant. We might also have said, oh, CMPs are quite new, they're not really very mature technologies, they're not very mainstream, maybe we can just get away with something simpler. I think both of those are no longer true. The legal framework that we work within as digital marketers is very complicated and messy, unfortunately, but I think it is pretty clear now what we need to do to be compliant. We need to do quite a lot of technically complicated things. And consent management platforms have become quite a mature software category. There are a large number of really good platforms that do that are affordable and established and do really good job. I should say thank you to our sponsors, Cookiebot, and Cookiebot is one of the platforms that we work with and we really like. Cookiebot, it's a great platform, and there are other good platforms available too. So there are good solutions. They deal with a complicated and important problem for you in a cost-effective way. And I think it's just not realistic for many very few organizations would have the technical capabilities to build a fully compliant digital presence without using a third-party technology stack like a CMP. So it is time to get one if you don't have one. I should say on the compliance side, you might take a view, well, we're some small niche company. A lot of our clients are quite small, low-profile B2B companies that maybe only operate in the UK or only operate in 1 or 2 countries. You might say, actually, I'm so far down the list of people that the ICO might issue compliance actions against that I can still take a risk around compliance. I don't think that's a very sensible or comfortable course of action, but also just from experience, even some of our clients, even some very low profile, inconspicuous businesses have already encountered legal problems because of issues with compliance. So I think you have to do something about this now, and a CMP is the obvious way to go. And the world's tiniest asterisk, just to remind me that I think there might just be 1 or 2 very special situations where a CMP isn't the right solution to compliance, and I'll show you that later on. So what does a CMP do for you? This diagram, sort of complicated, messy diagram, but it shows the complicated, messy technology world that we exist in. I'm going to use this diagram just to give us a framework to talk about a CMP and the different bits of functionality that it provides. So what we've got here on the left-hand side, a user is using a device and a browser on that device to interact with your website, and that device has some cookies on it. On the right-hand side, you have your website, and I've tried to highlight the aspects of your website that are pertinent for compliance and are pertinent for the operation of the CMP. So you've got a cookie warning or a compliance notice, a consent notice that users have to interact with when they come to your site, and where you try to get that consent. You have to have one of those to be compliant. You have to have some documentation around your privacy and your use of cookies, your use of tracking codes. So you need a policy doc. And then your website itself, the web server will interact. The web server will read and set cookies, server cookies, and those are subject to privacy legislation and compliance considerations. And then what tends to be the highest profile consideration is you'll almost certainly be using some third-party tools. You'll be using Google Analytics, or you'll be using a plugin to handle live chat, or you'll be using other third-party technologies that are embedded via JavaScript into the HTML of your website, and those will read and write cookies as well, and so they are subject to privacy legislation and need to be made compliant. And then it's quite likely that you might be using a tag manager such as Google Tag Manager to manage at least some of those third-party tools as well. So that's another component of the technology stack that's pertinent. So that's a rough view of the pertinent bits of technology. If I move on, what I've tried to do here is overlay in red what a CMP is going to do for you, what a consent management platform is going to do for you, and you can see it touches quite a lot of bits of this system. So the conspicuous thing, the sort of obvious thing, that the CMP is going to provide the consent banner, the cookie warning that the user interacts with, and it's going to manage the process of the user providing or withdrawing or not providing consent, and it's going to store that consent state for the user. So that's kind of really obvious and in your face. Your CMP also is going to help you with your cookie policy by providing the documentation that you need to provide to be compliant about what cookies you are using on your site and what the purposes are. And then the padlock icons here, your CMP is going to provide control mechanisms so that the things in your tech stack that read and write cookies are controlled in compliance with the user's consent settings. So if the user's given you consent to read and write a particular type of cookie, then those mechanisms can go ahead and operate. If the user hasn't given you consent, then they can't operate. The CMP provides the framework that controls all of that, which might be a matter of interacting with backend server-side cookies. It might be a matter of interacting with scripts that are running in JavaScript. It might be a matter of interacting with your tag manager. And then at the bottom of this diagram, most importantly, there needs to be an auditing capability. So the whole point of it, CMP doesn't do anything useful for you apart from help you to avoid the legal jeopardy of complying with privacy laws. There's no point implementing a CMP or any other measures for compliance unless you make sure that you actually are compliant. So the audit capability of the CMP is the thing that gives you the comfort and safety that you really have complied with the law, and it's a really important part of any CMP. So I'm going to use this framework to take us through the considerations that you might apply when choosing a CMP. I should say, there are some other things that the CMP does, and I couldn't fit everything in that diagram, and I'm not pretending that those other things aren't important, but I'm trying to focus on the most important thing. So first thing is you might work for a big company, in which case it's quite likely that someone else has just chosen the CMP for you, and your IT department or your legal department has said you must implement this CMP, and please go ahead. And if that's true, my advice to you would be to do as you're told and make the best of it, because it's a really complicated and dangerous thing to do in a large organization, to go against central organizational policies for something that has the complex legal and administrative aspects that a CMP does. So you might not have a choice because someone else in your company might have made that choice for you, and you just have to make the best of it. If you're in that situation, I still hope some of the things in my talk will be useful to you, because you've still got to actually implement that CMP and make it go with it. The other thing to bear in mind when you choose a CMP, feels like a CMP is feels like a fairly lightweight piece of technology. It's not like switching your web server to another CMS or changing to a different marketing automation system or something like that. But actually, it is quite hard to switch between different CMPs. Once you've put one in place, first of all, the implementation is fairly complicated, and you have to invest quite a lot of things in that. It does touch on other things that exist within your system. but also the CMP. Remember, the CMP records a user's consent status. So if thousands and thousands of people come to your website and they consent or don't consent to a particular CMP, if you later on switch to a different CMP, those user consents have to be gathered again. I guess in principle they could be migrated to a different CMP, but typically the CMP vendors don't support that use case. So you're going to, all the disruption of user experience of having to ask users for their consent on the first time that they visited, that all gets repeated again. So it's not impossible to switch between CMPs, but treat it as a serious choice and plan on sticking with whichever CMP you choose for an extended period of time. It's not a good idea to chop and choose between them. So assuming you have a choice, nobody's imposed a choice on you, what are the things that you should be thinking about in choosing a CMP? And I'm going to start by looking at the user experience considerations. So what I mean by that is the consent banner that a user interacts with when they come to your website. That's going to be provided and managed by your CMP. What are some of the things you should think of there? And I always think with user experience, it is useful to, it's important to look at user experience in the context of real user journeys. So by way of a few examples, I just recorded something last night of me trying to go through something that approximates a real user journey. So I'm on Google. I've got an incognito window to make sure I haven't already consented to anything. See all of the consent banners, and I'm pretending I'm looking for an office to rent in Oxford. So the first consent banner I see is Google's, and you can see this is a very conspicuous and intrusive consent banner. I can't actually, although you can see a page in the background there with some search results on it, I can't actually interact with that page at all. I can't scroll or click. I have to, forced to interact with this consent banner, and the page in the background is quite heavily grayed out to tell me that it's not operational. So this is a very sort of strongly modal consent banner that I just have no choice but to interact with it if I go any further. So I'm gonna accept Google's consent so that I can go on a bit further, and I'm just gonna skip ahead in the recording a little bit to save some time. So it's actually sort of fairly typical behavior we see in B2B search user experience, that someone who's looking to build a short list of possible suppliers is actually going to go through the Google search results and pick a few likely looking ones and open them up in new tabs. So I've done that. I picked a few potential sources, either suppliers of office space or sources of office space information that I wanted to look at in more detail. And I've created some new browser tabs, doing all of that within the SERP. And now I'm going to go ahead and interact with the individual websites that might have the information I want. So here's the first one I looked at. So this is Rightmove, and this is kind of very similar to Google. This is very strongly modal. The page behind is grayed out. Actually, interesting. There is a little difference because that page behind is still interactive. I can actually scroll on that page. I can't click on it, but it's receptive to scrolling inputs. But otherwise, I can't go any further on that page without interacting with the modal dialog. Here's a second example. This is very different, and actually you'd be forgiven for just missing the cookie banner here altogether. It's down at the bottom left there. It's not that big. It's not modal. It's in brand colors and with a very sort of branded look and feel. So the allow all cookie button is the same highlight color that's used elsewhere on the page. So it would be very easy to mistake that for just some other piece of content that's present within the page. And you can see I can completely interact with that page without interacting with the consent banner in any way. I should say I'm not showing any of these examples as best practice, and for sure some of these examples are not compliant. So I'm not saying you should copy these. I'm just using them as examples of the different approaches that we might take. Here's a different one, which is sort of intermediate between the two. The page is grayed out a bit, but I can interact with it, and the cookie banner is relatively inconspicuous down at the bottom off of the screen there. So it's a sort of compromise between the two approaches that we saw there. And then I have one more example at the end here, which is going to the opposite extreme, and this is definitely not compliant in the modern world. But this is a very inconspicuous cookie banner. It doesn't get in the way of anything, and that's up to me whether I interact with it or not. So some very different approaches there. Then let's think about why those different approaches might be appropriate or not appropriate. If I'm Google, everybody knows Google, everybody trusts Google, everybody knows that Google offers an extremely useful user experience. I know the Google search engine is going to be really, really helpful to me and actually essential to this particular user journey. I'm here to use Google to find information. So I have no choice other than to interact with this consent banner. And I'm not going to go anywhere else. I might be annoyed by this or frustrated, but I can't take my business elsewhere because there is only one Google search engine. I have to interact with this consent banner. And so for Google to make a choice of, kind of forcing me to interact with the consent banner makes perfect sense to Google. Google's not going to lose any customers because they put this very intrusive modal interaction in the way of the search engine. And arguably the same is probably true of Rightmove. Rightmove, it's a well-known brand. I kind of know it's a listing site, and there aren't many listing sites that are as comprehensive as Rightmove. So I'm probably quite strongly motivated to go through the consent banner. I'm not going to be annoyed by it enough to go, oh, I can't be bothered to go to the Rightmove website. I'm going to go back to someone else's. But for some of these other sites that I visited, that might not be as true. Maybe I want to go to the Savills site. I don't know the brand as well. I don't know the Rightmove brand. Rightmove's obviously got lots and lots of listings here. Savills only got a few. If Savills gave me a strongly modal dialogue before I could interact with the site, that might be a barrier. And remember, I've got all of those other lovely, tempting listings. I only pulled back like 4 or 5 of the listings out of hundreds of really promising listings that were on the Google website, on the Google search. So it could be that a modal banner here would reduce the conversion rate of this site. So there are different reasons for using different styles of consent banner in different scenarios. So some of the choices here, do you want the banner to be very highly branded, so it really just looks like part of, looks like all the other things that are on your site? Do you want it to be kind of brand compatible, so it doesn't quite look like your normal website, but the colors and so on are similar to your brand? Or do you actually deliberately want to make it quite distinctive, so it doesn't really look like it's anything to do with your site? It looks like it's it just looks like it's a consent banner that's provided by some external system. There are pros and cons to all of those approaches, I think. And then the kind of big choice, do you want a really intrusive modal banner that forces interaction before anyone can get to the rest of your site? If you do that, you've got the best chance of obtaining a consent, or at least obtaining a consent preference from the user. But you've also got the best chance of driving them away because you've annoyed them, and that's going to reduce the conversion rate. Do you want to use a non-intrusive, non-modal banner that has the least impact on their user experience? It has the least risk of driving them away, but it also has a high risk that they just won't interact with the banner, and then you don't get a consent state at all. So these things matter for user experience and for conversion optimization. They also have an implication for the speed of your site, and that relates to your Core Web Vitals scores. For those of you who know what that is, measurements that Google cares about for SEO purposes. So different styles of banner will matter. So what I come down to here is there isn't one right approach. If you're a publisher with really compelling content, you might want to use a modal banner. If you're focused on search marketing in a really competitive industry, you might want to use a non-modal banner so that you don't harm your conversion rates. You might have some pages on your site where you want to take one of those approaches, and some pages where you want to take another approach. You might have some traffic sources where you want to take one approach and some where you want to take another approach. So the best thing a CMP can do is to offer you some flexibility about the look and feel and the user experience of those consent dialogues. But look for some flexibility in your CMP. I just said this is an area. Cookiebot is not bad in this area. But we wouldn't mind seeing some more flexibility from Cookiebot actually to mix and match different approaches across a website. Some other systems have much less flexibility, some have a bit more flexibility. So CMPs do vary in this respect. Second thing I want to talk about is is the control mechanisms. I'll try and go through this a bit quickly because I'm getting time if I'm not careful. So just a reminder, my overview of a CMP. So now we're zooming in on this part of the system. You've interacted with your user to get consent. You understand their consent state, and now the tags that read and write cookies need to be allowed to proceed or not, depending on that consent state. Basically, three different ways of managing that control process within a CMP. So the first is, I'm going to call it manual. In other words, the CMP doesn't impose any control at all, but you or your developers can write code, can modify the code either of the web server's backend functionality or of the front end functionality that's done in JavaScript, so that and there'll be an API or multiple APIs of some sort, so that you can query the consent state of the user and you can change the behavior of your site accordingly. So this is a developer task, okay, but it's in some cases this is what you may need to do depending on how what your tech stack is like and how it behaves and performs. The second approach is what's usually called script blocking. So this is a CMP provides some fancy JavaScript that interferes with all the other JavaScript on your site and just means it doesn't run unless consent has been given. So the ideal situation here is that just everything that needs consent is blocked by default, and it's only enabled when the CMP recognizes that that consent has been granted. I have really mixed feelings about script blocking. It does have a place, but it's a pretty crude weapon. It's a kind of sledgehammer approach, and it doesn't actually block everything. If it blocks scripts, as the name suggests. So if you're if you're reading and writing cookies server side, script blocking can't do anything about that. You've still got to use another solution to ensure those are compliant. So it's if it has a place, but I think it's really uncomfortable to rely exclusively on script blocking for compliance. And then a third approach to control is to use an integration with Tag Manager and with a Tag Manager, which is very often going to be Google Tag Manager. And typically one is going to want to use the consent mode functionality of Google Tag Manager, although that is not essential. So these are sort of three different ways of achieving, allowing the CMP to control the compliance sensitive functionality of your tech stack. So one thing I would say here is, if maybe you're looking to implement a CMP, you don't have tag management yet, but you're thinking about getting it, or you have a sort of incomplete tag management implementation. You haven't done anything with consent mode, but you're sort of thinking about doing consent mode in the future. I think it's a really good idea to just look at these three things together. They do interact very strongly. And if you implement a CMP and then the next day you come along and say, right, now we'll get our tag management sorted out, you're going to find a whole lot of things in your CMP implementation have to be done differently or done over again. So I think it's a really good idea, even though it sort of complicates the project. It's a good idea to look at implementation of a CMP with either implementation or a refresh of your tech management stack, and to look at how you're going to use consent mode around tag management at the same time. Don't take these on individually. You'll end up with a whole world of pain because of the interaction. I want to really quickly say a few things about consent mode as a more general design pattern. So this is a brief interlude to the how do you choose a CMP. I'm going to whiz through this because I'm going to be tight for time otherwise. So just show you the sort of thing that I'm trying to get to. Uh, Here's a website. Let's say I want to embed some functionality in a website. So kind of as a sort of cartoon of how that happens, I've embedded a live chat widget in my website, and the live chat widget is a sort of complicated machine with lots of moving parts. And some of those moving parts may set or read a cookie. So if this is live chat, maybe I need a cookie to maintain state when a user moves from one page to another. And maybe I want to interact with a tracking cookie so that I can record the usage and the conversions from the live chat. So two different cookies for two different purposes that are read and written by the live chat widget. But the live chat widget is just one box. So I stick one thing onto my site and it does live chat and it reads and writes cookies. So I've got a kind of awkward choice. If I just stick the live chat widget onto my site and just use it independently of any consent, it's just going to go ahead and read and write its cookies, and that breaks the law. It's pretty clear. I needed to get user consent before the live chat widget read and wrote its cookies. And the fact it's a widget and it's a piece of third-party code doesn't excuse me from that. I've done something illegal by using that live chat widget. The other alternative is I could take an approach that the live chat widget just doesn't run at all until the user gives consent. So this could be done, for instance, with script blocking in a consent management platform. And then I have a different problem, which is the live chat widget just doesn't work. I've reserved some real estate on the screen for it somehow, but it doesn't run because I'm blocking it because I don't want it to go ahead and break the law until I know I've got consent. And if you remember back from my screen video, sometimes there can be an indefinite delay here. The user might come along, be interacting with the website, but not interacting with the consent banner. So their consent state is unknown for a long period of time, perhaps for the whole time that they're on the website. So I can't just say, oh, well, let's wait 10 seconds and then go ahead and fire up the live chat widget. I have to know that the user's consented. Now, suppose that live chat widget works in a different way, and it actually had a knowledge of the user's consent state and an ability to interact with that. And I provided that knowledge of user consent to the widget when it was operating on the page. So when the page first loads, I tell my live chat widget, we don't know the user's consent state yet. The page is just loading. We don't have time to find out the user's consent state. So the live chat widget doesn't do the things that set and read the cookies. It does the basic things. It renders the user interface and it kind of issues a prompt to the user to say, hey, I'm here and you can chat with me if you want to. But it doesn't do the other things that would cause it to be in breach of the law. And then at a later stage, I say, hey, live chat widget, now the user's consented and I know the user's consented. You can go ahead and do the things that need consent. And then those bits of the machine fire up and they legally with consent go ahead and interact with the user's cookies. And I could be somewhere in between. Maybe the user consents to personalization, but they don't consent to tracking, and that's enough for one part of the live chat widget to do its thing, but the other part has to hold off. So this, if I had a widget that was consent aware, it can do the right thing. So kind of a lot of, for historical reasons, because in the past nobody cared about consent, a lot of third-party technologies are really what I would call consent ignorant. They just assume that it's fine to read and write cookies. They do everything altogether by default. And that gives us the two bad options of either we can use that thing and it breaks the law, or we can block it and it doesn't work until later on when we get consent. So neither of those is a great option. If the architecture was instead consent aware, then it follows a different design pattern. It says I'm going to do as much as I can without any knowledge of the consent state, and then when the consent state is known, I'm going to do the other things if I'm allowed to by consent. So this consent-aware design pattern it means we don't have to make these, we don't have to choose between these two bad options. We can do a really good job and still be compliant with the law. So this is more or less how Google's consent mode in Google Analytics works. Do what you can without consent, and then do the other things when you know what consent has been given. And it's supported really well by Google Tag Manager. If you integrate Google Tag Manager with a CMP, you get a really clear infrastructure that says, okay, here's here's the triggers that we use when the page first loads. We don't know consent. And then later on, once we do know consent, and we've got some variables that tell us what that consent status is, then we can fire the other things and make the other things happen. So really like to see more third-party tools being built in this consent-aware way. And there really aren't very many yet. I have come across one or two that are doing this properly. But if you're a tools vendor, or if you have any influence with any tools vendors, let's get consent awareness built into the third-party things that you plug into our website, because this is what we need to build to use good third-party tools in a way that doesn't break the law. Anyway, back to those different control modes that the CMP provides. Truth is, in most tech stacks, you are going to need to use more than one of those. You might use script blocking for some things. You might use tag manager integration. You might have to use an API for some functionality that just isn't accessible except via the back end of the web server. So again, look for flexibility there. A good CMP should support all of those methods, and you should be able to pick and choose between them. Something I really like, and lots of credit to Cookiebot for having this. Script blocking is a very blunt weapon, but selective script blocking is great. So sometimes script blocking really is the thing that you want to use. And in some CMPs, including Cookiebot, you can say, I want script blocking to block some things, but I don't want it to get in the way of other things because I'm going to manage those via Google Tag Manager. I'm going to manage those via the API. So select script blocking is a really grown-up thing to have. Third aspect of the system, I said a CMP helps you with your cookie documentation, your privacy documentation. In some jurisdictions, in order to be fully compliant, you need to provide excruciating detail about what cookies you are using and what the purposes for using those cookies is. And you really do not want to have to do that yourself, or to employ somebody who has to look after that. It's almost an impossible job because of the technical complexity, and it's certainly an extremely dull and unrewarding job. So a CMP should do this for you automatically. That's one of the aspects, one of the facets of CMP's functionality you should look for as part of your evaluation. Consider things like, do you need multiple language support? So do you need your cookie policy to be written in multiple languages, because your users are going to be in multiple languages? And also consider, a kind of related but different point, do you need actually different policies in different locales, because you're doing some business in South America, and you're going to apply a different level of compliance in South America than you are, a different approach to compliance in South America than you are in the EU, for example. And I guess this area, it's kind of dull, but it's important, and it can be complicated. And the ultimate question here is, are your legal team, or whatever the proxy for your legal team is in your organization, are they happy with the approach that's being taken? There's no point implementing CMP and then the next day your lawyers say, well, that cookie policy that the tool's generating isn't adequate. We've still got an acceptable level of legal jeopardy. You need to go in and change it. So make sure that it does what you need in this respect. Next thing I want to talk about, as I said at the beginning, the auditing capability of the CMP is really important. And it's important in multiple ways. So the first thing is, when you are initially implementing a CMP, if the audit tool is good, it will help you identify all the things on your site that are causing compliance problems, all the things that read and write cookies, and it'll help you figure out and map out what strategies you're going to use. You're going to use script blocking, you're going to put them in tag manager. You're just going to take the things off the site altogether because they're more trouble than they're worth, or can you change their behavior so that they don't read and write cookies? So the audit tool kind of creates your to-do list for your route to compliance as you implement your CMP. And a good audit tool makes that much, much easier. The other things to remember, however careful you are, something will slip through. I mean, maybe other agencies never make a mistake, but we miss things because this is complicated. So you think you've got all of the elements of the tech stack that are causing compliance issues, but there are one or two that slip through. And then even if you catch absolutely everything in the implementation, things will change. A user comes along later on and they create some piece of content that embeds a third-party media player, say that you haven't used before, and that raises a compliance issue. So one way or another, you're going to miss some things, and you're going to end up being non-compliant, even though you've gone to all of this to become compliant. So you need a strong audit capability in your CMP. It's absolutely essential, and you also need a process that uses it. And the tech platform itself isn't going to impose this on you. You're going to need an organizational process that says it's somebody's job to use this auditing tool to review to review what's covered by it. With most CMPs, you can try out the audit capabilities either before you buy the tool or at least before you commit and implement it. And this is certainly true with Cookiebot. The audit tool in Cookiebot is really strong in my view, and you can sign up for a free trial with Cookiebot and try out the audit tool. So this is get to know this aspect of the system before you get committed to it. And then last thing on choosing. I don't want to go into this in a lot of detail, but like any piece of technology that you buy, the commercial side of things matters. So are you happy with the price? Are you happy with the pricing scales? So so CMPs vary a lot in terms of how the pricing works. Sometimes it's per page, sometimes it's per visitor, sometimes it's per something else. Cookiebot it actually has a slightly annoying feature in this because we do a lot of work with landing pages that we tend to put on a separate subdomain, and Cookiebot charges by the domain, but it's actually a subdomain counts as a different domain. So we end up having to pay extra for our Cookiebot licenses because we have our landing pages on a subdomain, which is still, Cookiebot's still pretty good value for money. So it's not that big a complaint, but it's certainly a consideration that that we have to balance against other considerations. The third bullet point here, do you need are you the sort of company that's going to need enterprise functionality? And do you have lots of different users that are all going to interact with the CMP? Do you need like a manager and a sort of review approval workflow? Do you need audit trails of changes to the consent banner? Those sorts of things. If you need enterprise functionality, that's definitely going to steer you away from Cookiebot, really, which isn't really an enterprise tool, and towards some of the other CMPs. Again, with any tool, customer support matters. Is the good customer support available? They speak your team's languages? Are they in the right time zone for your team? Are you happy with the contractual terms? I put liability here. No, I don't think any CMP vendor is going to accept liability for you being taken to court by the ICO because you're not compliant. But you're only doing this to minimize your legal liability, to make sure that the contracts make sense. And then there are some other considerations like logging and kind of user level auditing. Can you prove that individual users have consented? There are considerations like handling cross-domain consent if you've got a whole bunch of websites and you want to cover them all within a single consent framework. So these things might matter to you depending on this. And again, just remember when you're making these choices, you're likely to be stuck with a CMP for quite a long time. So make sure you choose a good one. But Phil, are you
yeah, we're 3 minutes over. So
sorry, I'm pretty much. Can I take 1 minute and go through the lessons learned?
Yeah. I've also, John, I've put a link into chat, which is to the kind of second Zoom room. So if you want to possibly jump in there and carry on the discussion there, obviously people will get access to the slides. I've sent all the questions that people were posting directly through to you. But we're literally almost 4 minutes late.
Sorry, I realized now I was running for 12:45 and I should have been running for 12:40. Sorry. Lessons. I've covered a lot of things, as a lot of the things on this list as we went through anyway. Couple of things I didn't talk about. If you're implementing a CMP in conjunction with Google Tag Manager, then the preview mode in Google Tag Manager is going to really help you with implementation complexity. So that's a very good thing. And don't forget about Core Web Vitals, and the testing tool in Core Web Vitals allows you to test the impact on Core Web Vitals as you go along. And then I won't really talk to this, but here's an example of a landing page that we built that where we've taken a different approach to consent, which is we just made sure that there's nothing on here that actually needs consent. So we don't need a consent panel or a CMP. And that's surprisingly complicated to do because you have to be really careful. There's nothing in your tech stack that's going to read or write a cookie. And actually, the audit tool in CookieBot is great for that. We can still do a bit of tracking on that page because we can use Microsoft Clarity in cookieless mode. So there's my summary. I won't take up any more time going through that. And yes, sorry for the timing at the end there, but I am done,
no
and I will
worries.
take questions to the other chat room.
Yes, I've sent you those questions. I'll just give people a second to scan your QR code. I guess that's the one right for LinkedIn to send you a direct message on LinkedIn. So I'm just gonna share my screen, just do the intro. So we're 5 minutes over at the moment, but okay. Yeah, John, I've sent you a Slack DM with the link to the second room and with the questions that people have asked. Cool.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Phil. Thanks everyone for your
Cool.
attention.
Okay, thank you for doing the talk there, John. Some really useful stuff, and I completely agree about not using auto blocks. Really bad idea, and it also disables consent mode. So and as well as slowing down the site. So thank you again for that, John.